Hello, and welcome to Romance Writers Therapy. I am Marty V, and I'm joined by Carly Spade, who writes fantasy rom-com, and we're going to talk about all things fantasy rom-com today, and we're very excited. Her sixth book, and it's the end of the series, correct, Carly?
Yep, that's correct.
The Contemporary Mythos series drops today, so go check this out. I'm in love with this concept. Carly lives in Colorado with her husband and her two fur babies. But Carly, will you tell me what your Contemporary Mythos stories are? Like, kind of give us like a little bit of like the concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of spawned from my absolute love for contemporary romance. I do read it a lot. However, when I tried to write it, I'm a huge fantasy writer, and I really missed the magic. So I have always loved Greek mythology, and I told myself that I would never, though, dip into writing it unless I could come up with something truly unique, because it is very saturated. There's a lot out there, and I didn't want to deliver something that's already been done if I was going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I basically decided, okay, well, I can get the best of both worlds here. We'll combine contemporary romance tropes, which I always want to write, with Greek mythology, Greek gods, and set it to the point in the modern day setting where people don't know they exist. So that is kind of the whole point, and each book focuses on a different god finding true love. There are some retellings, reimaginings, and I just basically take all the myths and interweave them, and all of the books do intersect somewhat, but they can also be read as standalones. However, it is a lot more fun to read them in order because you are going to be getting all of the Easter eggs that I've put in there.
I love that.
Yeah, but I have designed them to be standalone because they each are very different, and some of them, you know, some person may not be able to get as into them just because they are so different. So I wanted them to be able to not feel bad if they wanted to skip one or something to that effect. But yeah, okay. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
Do you mind if I ask, like, are they different because, like, okay, so like Hades and Poseidon, are they going to have like different settings that they exist within? Like, how are they different?
So everything exists in modern day America, or they'll sometimes go to other countries in the books and stuff too. But the difference lies in the kind of the theme of the book. And also they're told from the heroine's point of view, each book, except for Zeus, which is dual POV. But they're told from the heroine's point of view, and each heroine is extremely different. You know, you've got more of a nerdy one. You've got a tough, you know, one that's an MMA fighter. You got a ocean conservationist / pro gamer. You've got
I love it.
Who runs her own business and is completely does not believe in love. And it's just, they're all very different. And I really strove to make them have their each distinct personalities so that you wouldn't feel like you're reading the same book, even though they're supposed to be different. I have read series that are like that. And I wanted to make sure that I made it very clear and very distinct that each voice and each theme of these books is going to be very different.
I love that. That is something, because my writing tends to be very voicey. And so that is something that I question all the time, is like, are my point of views separate enough? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask, like, how, like, did you find any techniques that helped you do that?
So I know a lot of writers don't like having a person in mind for their characters as far as their faces or everything like that. But before I started writing novels, I used the very first full thing that I ever wrote, and I was a kid, was a movie script. And I actually have a film background before I ever got into writing books. And I also worked for comic books for a while too. So I have a different segue into writing a full-length novel. And because I'm so used to having this imagery in my head of actors or comic drawing, and I just very used to the imagery in my head, I automatically face cast, is what people call it, my characters. And I usually at least have the main hero and heroine face cast in my head. And for this series in particular, it helped me a great deal to do that, because it helped me to make them distinct. Because this actor or actress or model or whatever I decided on, I would actually even watch videos of them moving and their expressions and their mannerisms, and it would help me create a different character for each person so that I wasn't just relying on myself. Because if each of them is me, it's not going to feel as distinct. So I would extremely focus on their mannerisms, and that's why I face cast my main characters for that reason. And I do share who I originally had in my head, but I try not to. I mean, I want people to be able to, think of whoever they want to think of. But a lot of people, when I started, announcing that, they were very interested. Who did you face cast for this character and this character? And so if I just started sharing that these are the people that I used, but again, you do you. So.
Exactly. Well, I love that it really enables you to have a really nice level of engagement with your readers, to like say like, okay, this was my inspiration. And like, it's like, it happened one summer when Tessa Bailey was saying how she just really fell in love with Alexis from Schitt's Creek and how she wanted to write her story. In the first couple pages, like part of it was having Alexis in my brain, but the amount that like she just like she was just on the page. Like I heard her like speech patterns and saw her body movements and like all of that, and it definitely was implanted, but I wonder if I would have like come there anyway. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah,
it's an interesting way to just bring another form of engagement with your readers. I love how the story was born there. Like, that is a really lovely, like, solution to two problems, right? Like, I would love to write Greek mythology. I just need the coolest idea. I would love to write contemporary romance, but I miss, magic. And like together they make this beautiful little story.
Yeah, and I haven't really seen, so I've read a lot of retellings myself and everything, of course, even before I even started writing books. And I've never really seen to this degree. I've had readers call my stuff Percy Jackson for adults with romance, and I never even heard of the coined term of rom-com fantasy before I started doing this. I didn't know it was even a thing. So I loved that they were calling my stuff that, because that is, that's what I want to be known as for sure.
I love that.
Again, the combination of two of my favorite things, because I grew up I love 90s, early 2000s rom-coms, and I wish, and they seem like they're starting to come back a little bit, but I really wish they would come back full force, because they're so fun. And I really, I miss those feel-good rom-coms. And so I definitely channeled those for all these books for the most part, especially Eros. That one is really, really, I went full-blown cheesy rom-com for that one.
That is so cute. I had never heard rom-com fantasy either until like you and I were talking through email. And the amount like that like made a picture in my brain. Like I understood exactly what that was without knowing that it existed prior to that conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
So we were going to talk a bit about writing rom-com fantasy, and then what tropes, like what promises, what things do you have to do to like engage your readership and give them what they're looking for?
So it's a fine line, because at one point, and it's funny to read some of the reviews, because some people, when it comes to this kind of stuff, because you're mixing in fantasy and contemporary romance period, is never usually too long. Some of them go way longer. I know Mariana Zapata, I think her name is. Her books are usually on the longer side.
Like Lucy Score also tends to write long.
Does she write a little bit more angsty ones? I'm not familiar with her.
I have only read one of her books. I would not call it, it's kind of angsty. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think also like the romance is definitely the center of the plot, but there is exterior, like quite a bit of exterior plot outside of that.
Okay.
I tend to write a fast-paced story, so like tend to write and read like shorter rom-coms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, it's finding a fine line, because then when you're mixing fantasy into it, then there's this other reader who may come in expecting something a little bit more extravagant, I guess. So it's trying to find that good spots of not going too fast, but not going too slow with the pacing. Yes, there's magic, but is it to the point where it's even, suspension of disbelief, believable type magic? Or is it, did I not introduce enough of it for people to even try to wrap their heads around it? So it can be difficult because of that. And I do have, again, it's a matter of, some people think that, okay, this went way too fast, or this felt rushed, or some people say this went way too slow. And because it's never actually been equalized, I feel like I have actually found a good sweet spot. It's just, you know, some people prefer one over the other.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the mixing of the fantasy aspect with what people are usually used to from a contemporary romance, because you'll have hardcore contemporary romance readers and you'll have hardcore fantasy writers trying to read this. And it's hard, I find, to 100% please the people that are hardcore on one side of the fence or the other. So I feel like I did find a good balance. I will say that throughout the books, as I wrote them, it became more and more and more comfortable. And so with Zeus, the final book, I feel like I 100% found my sweet spot, absolutely, with that book for sure. So
that's awesome. Was there a reason why you chose to do dual POV for just that book?
So Zeus has a reputation.
Okay.
And I, even from the moment that I introduced him in Hades, I had, and I didn't realize, I knew people didn't like him, but I didn't realize to what extent people just absolutely hate him. And I know he's got a reputation.
I mean, there is nothing you could have said that would make me want to read it more.
Yeah, well, that's
like everyone hates him. Like, oh, give me this hero. I'll take a bite. Let's do this.
Everybody hates Zeus because he's just seen as a womanizing, cheating, sexual deviant who is just the most scum of the earth god on the face of the planet. And I knew from the minute that I decided I was going to write this series what 6 gods I was going to do, and Zeus was one of them. But I purposely made him last. He would say that, oh, you made me last because you saved the best for last, which is why I did that tagline. But no, you were last because I had to figure you out.
I love that.
So he's dual POV because you have to be in his head. That was the other thing too. I had to figure out, that was the first time I've done a full dual POV, and I've been hesitating because it's hard to get into a dude's head, especially a dude like Zeus. So I really wanted a chance to practice, figure it out, read some authors that were really good at it. And I took 2 years to figure that all out as I was writing the rest of the series. And I finally settled on his voice, and I said, yeah, this is going to help people realize who he is, what he's about, and that he's more under the surface. And so that's why he had to be dual POV, so that you could be seeing what he was thinking while the heroine is basically bringing him to his knees. So
I love it. So how do you, obviously you don't, okay, so removing, we can't make every reader happy, right?
Absolutely.
Like we were discussing before, I love a friends to lovers romance. It is not for everybody. You know what I mean? There's no making everybody happy.
Yeah.
But how do you bring in the magic element and the world building without it overshadowing the romance of it all?
So I think that it's one thing, the advantage that you have with Greek mythology is it's so popular and so many people just can't get enough of it. And I think that helps a lot because these big names people are already familiar with. It's the lesser known gods that I have to spend a little bit more time within the stories, kind of explaining who they are, what they're all about. And even the big names, there's a lot of stuff that people necessarily may not know about. So it's kind of interweaving all that stuff into conversation, or mostly conversation. But I mean, obviously I do it other ways. And for people that are really known about the myths, they may pick up on some stuff that others would not, that I've subtly put in there for those hardcore, myth fans.
I love that. That is so great to I don't know, to just treat people with a special interest. I see you. I know you're going to love this. You know what I mean? It's the perfect kind of pandering. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's exactly why I did it, because I knew that unless somebody was really, really familiar with, for instance, the Eros and Psyche myth, they would not get half of that they were essentially reading a modern actual retelling of that exact myth, but just done in a completely modernized way. And somebody who's not familiar with that myth, forwards and backwards, they wouldn't get it. But it's still toned in such a way for anybody who comes in brand new to it, they wouldn't know any of the wiser, and they're just thinking that it's, part of the storyline. So it worked out in that respect. But yeah, again, it is, I had a little bit of an advantage with the world building because these characters are already quote unquote established. The gods anyway, the main Greek gods, though the heroines are actually coming in completely new. But that helped.
I'm sorry, the heroines don't know that these are Greek gods.
Correct. Yeah, they meet them. They all have, and some of them are more extreme than others, but they all have what they call their mortal guises. And then they also have taken on these roles within the world to kind of, also lend into their mortal guises because people don't believe in them anymore. And they want to still be amidst mortals because regardless of anything, they still have jobs to uphold, even though mortals don't even realize that they're there doing it. So I set up a lot of different nods and everything, and also suggesting that the Greek gods are not the only ones that exist from mythologies. So
there are more. You could do a spin-off with this, is what my brain just 1 + 1 = 2, right? Like you could take it into a different mythos.
Oh yeah, and I purposely did that because I have a huge interest in Norse.
That's why you did it, because you're real smart.
I hope I'm trying to be, but I have a huge...
Gosh, don't I want to be?
I have a huge interest in Norse mythology as well. And it's, aside from, obviously, everybody knows of Thor and everything now because of Marvel. But there's a whole, there's a whole other aspect to him and everything else that Marvel kind of really took license to. But I've always loved Norse mythology, and I even have it's meant to be a duo, and I hopefully eventually will write the second book, but I do have Power of Eternity that involves Celtic mythology. And I did a short story with my Mythos characters where I actually had my Celtic characters and them meet. So I kind of did a cross-dimension universe type deal.
Okay, so they are not existing on the same plane, but you brought them to the same spot, right? Like their normal worlds are not the same, or are they all existing in contemporary life?
Yes and no. So it's all it does all connect. And I basically and Zeus, he really wraps it up saying, hey, Greek gods are not the only ones in existence. So, be prepared for more of that. But I definitely, I want to explore many, many things. And even though Zeus is the last book in this main series, I'm definitely not done. But that's as far as just being set in a contemporary world setting. Those are the 6 books that are going to be there. But I want to branch out to do other things and not just limit myself to the modern world. So
I am so excited for you. What a great, I love a retelling. And I love that you're hanging your hat on these myths and finding other, it's not just Greek, it's not just Nordic. You know what I mean? I love it. So how do you go about plotting and drafting all of this? Do you do that, or are you a discovery writer?
So I call myself a planter because I do plot somewhat. I have to know where I'm going with it. If I don't, I get lost and the story suffers for it. I've tried to do it before and I had to go back and do so much heavy revising. I told myself I will never do this again. So I don't necessarily have every single detail laid out, but I at least want to know what's going to happen in the beginning, where am I going in the middle, and how's it going to end. And at times, because they're romances and it has to meet certain beats in certain places, and I want to make sure I hit those. So I will map out some of the chapters and say, okay, well, by chapter 16 they should be doing it, or something to that effect, or just kind of making sure that I hit those markers. Especially I write slow burns, so they're a little bit different in that realm. And I just want to make sure that I'm giving them enough time to have tension and blah, blah, blah. So for that, I'll do a little bit. And then when I'm drafting, sometimes, the characters will take it in a little bit of a different direction than first intended. But as long as it's going where I want it to go in the end, that's the important thing of just getting to that end.
So you have the romance to hit all those beats while because you said that I'm going to say it incorrectly because I want to say Eros Is that his name?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I said it correctly. Like,
yep, you're
pat
good.
me in the back. So, like, with Eros, it's a direct retelling. How did you hit those romantic beats while still staying true to that myth?
So for that one, the myth itself made it kind of easy. I didn't do it as tragically as the real myth is, because in my universe, I mean, there's some tragedy, obviously, because the real world does have tragedy, but to the extent of what Greek mythology does it, no. You can't have a rom-com with such extreme tragedies that Greek myths do, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it kind of already laid out the foundation for me. And even though he's not, I will tell anybody, because some people have real issue with this, so I'll put it out there now. He doesn't end up with Psyche herself. I kind of switch it up in such a way because of the fact that I didn't want the absolute tragedy involved, but I wanted the same story to be told. So he's essentially living the story again, but the real one this time. So it's not Psyche, but she does appear in the book. That's all explained, and I don't want to spoil anything, but it's still, and I just basically took that myth and gave the character her name's Alani. I gave her those aspects of Psyche from the myth, but just kind of made her modern. But I gave her the same type of story, the same type of situation as what Psyche was in Greek myth. And just, again, I took rom-com standards, cheesy, hardcore rom-com standards, and I just mixed them all together for that book. So
I love that. That's really interesting. So, like, Eros is essentially reliving, like, a pattern that's happened to him before.
Yes.
Oh, that's really cool. That's really fun.
I don't want to spoil anything in saying what, but yes, Absolutely. That's essentially just so people know it's not Psyche, but he is reliving that myth again.
Well, that's like a really great, like, in terms of Gwen Hayes romancing the beat, like, that's a really great no way. Like, I'm not going to do this again. Like, this is not going to happen to me again. Right? Like, that is like the direct line my brain went to.
You got it. And I have read that. I've read Romancing the Beat. I think every romance writer should read Romancing the Beat, because it is a lifesaver.
It really is. Because, like, I consider myself a discovery writer. A lot of times in my drafting, I will have my chapters laid out with all of the beats. And my first drafts are a mess, right? Yeah. So I go through and I write based on each beat what needs to happen for the plot in that chapter, right?
Yeah.
And then the second, edit through goes through and makes it all make sense. And actually, like, usually there's a number of scenes that need to be worked back in. Yeah. Need to be worked in because I've gone too fast. But yeah, Romancing the Beat is, like, total lifesaver. I've also used it to, like, free write and then work in the other direction. Like, I've got the edit, or I've got the first draft, and then I reverse engineer it.
Yeah, I tend to be an underwriter, and I basically try to get that first draft out of my head as fast as possible. Yeah. And I'll even, if I can't think of a person's name right off the bat, I just put a marker. And if I can't think of a description for a place, or I don't want to take the time to stop and look up a description, I just put a marker. I will look it up when I go back through. But I need that first draft out, done, and I'll feel way better about myself, knowing Absolutely. That the second time and third time through, 10 to 12K is going to get added to that probably.
Yes, absolutely. Same process. I will like, if it's a scene I'm just having a hard time with, I'll just put a note like, hey, finish this and move on. Like, sometimes you just have to find the way your brain hacks.
My brain wants to know that the draft is done.
Exactly. Mine does too. And then if I give it too much time, then it gets really heavy and the words just get really hard.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, and those endings are so hard. And typically my beginnings and endings get rewritten like 3 times anyway to make the plot so it satisfies. Do you rewrite your beginnings and endings a lot too?
My endings, maybe, because sometimes I won't, especially with the last line, I will write it essentially, and then when I go back again, I think to myself, that doesn't hit hard enough. No, I need to make that better. I can do better. The beginnings, I really think about those beginnings a lot, because I've been told time and time again by some editors, my critique partners, everybody, that first line is sink or swim for a lot of readers, and it's true. It's that first line really needs to pull them in. So I I sit there with a blank like, document, sometimes for 10 minutes, just staring at it, thinking, who is this character and what am I going to have the first thing do? Or it has to describe them perfectly. So, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but at this point, with the amount of books I've written, I think I've really gotten to a point where that first line, I have to know the character is first before I even start writing it. But I've gotten pretty good at describing that character in that very first line. The ending is where I usually have to fix it up a bit.
My endings, I have such a hard time with it because I do like writing angst. So at the end, you've already made everybody happy. Yeah. Like they're happy. And it's not it's not in my wheelhouse to write happy things. Yeah. And so like, even as a reader, I always say there's such a thin line between me smiling at the page and me rolling my eyes. And so it's so hard as a writer to like walk that thin line, knowing that there are, again, you can't please everybody because there are people that are going to read it and be like, oh, I just don't think they were like, it wasn't romantic enough. And there's other people that will be really happy with it.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's so hard. It's so hard to accept that like not everyone's going to love it. And there's just nothing we can do.
I know it. Trust me. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's hard. And I would even say for just for any newbie writers coming in, it takes a while. And I still can't grasp my head around it all the time. I've gotten better, but it is hard to accept that absolute fact. Not everybody's going to like everything you write or even anything you write. And I was given a piece of advice by another, veteran author friend of mine to say, go and find your favorite book and read the 1 and 2 star reviews because not everybody likes them either. And it's true. Some of the biggest known authors have people that do not like their stuff and rip them to shreds too. It's just the way of things. So yeah, it's really hard to get past it, but it's just a necessity or else it'll drive you mad.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just like I want them to like everything I do, I don't like everything I read either. Like I am not everybody's reader either. And, that has to be okay.
Yep, it's true. Yep, it's very true.
So what is like one of your favorite parts of writing the series, writing in general, writing romantic fantasy?
Well, for me, just in general, writing wise, period, I love writing dialogue and I absolutely love writing banter. It is one of my absolute favorite things to do. I'm not good at it. Yeah, I'm not good at it improv wise in real life. I'm horrible at banter in real life, but I can write it. My husband says it all the time. He's like, that's your comeback? Hey, if you would have given me 5 minutes to think about it, I could have come up with something really good.
If you give me 5 minutes to think about it, look, this is happening in real time. Okay, let's lower our expectations.
Exactly. So real time, I suck at it. But when I actually get to sit there and think about these imaginary people saying stuff, oh yeah. And I mean, honestly, most of my heroines are way more confident than I am, to be honest. And I would never say half the stuff these chicks say to the guys ever. But I live vicariously through them. And I have had several readers that have made mentions about my banter, and I'm glad for it because I would love to be known for that. That's something that I love dialogue. And sometimes I get to a point where I read back a page and go, wow, this is really dialogue heavy. And I try to go back and add, more descriptions or, and just anything. But again, that comes from writing scripts and doing stuff with comics beforehand, which is all very dialogue heavy. But then I have to remember people are reading this. They're not seeing anything, essentially. And I will say with Zeus, it was a little bit different because I wrote that book even with thinking of the audiobook in mind already. Because,
that's cool.
Well, because I had the 2 people cast already. Before I even wrote one word, I knew who the 2 actors were going to be because I've worked with them before. Especially, and I'm going to give him a plug here, especially
please
Thomas
do. I was going to ask you. Oh, I'm so sorry. And then I talked. Okay. Yes. Especially who?
Thomas Locklear. He is an amazing, amazing narrator with a deep, gruff voice, and he fits Zeus so perfectly. And I had an author friend who had let me know about him because someone else that she knew had used him for her books. And as soon as I heard his voice, I have to. It's just absolutely melty. And I knew that he did there's one chapter in Eros that is told from his point of view. And so Thomas actually stepped in to do that one chapter. And Stella did Alani's chapters, all of it, essentially. And she also did Hades. And so Stella Bloom, I also got to come on for Zeus because she's amazing. And I knew the two of them would just be mind-blowing for an audiobook. And so the entire time I was writing, I was thinking of their voices. So the people that I face cast with their voices, and it just, oh my gosh, it's night and day. It actually helped propel my writing. But I knew the way that their inflections and the way that they pause and everything like that. So to hear the audiobook, and I just heard the whole thing, I think a week ago, it's amazing. It is done as a duet too. So it's, for anybody that's not familiar with what a duet is, there is no guy doing female voices or then the woman doing male voices.
Oh.
Yeah. The guy handles all of the male voices, no matter if it's, the heroine's point of view chapter. If Zeus is speaking, it's going to be Thomas's voice there, not Stella's. And I decided on doing that when I got to the first sexy scene, which is told from the heroine's point of view. And Zeus says some stuff, and I paused and I said, I'd be doing myself a disservice here if the readers don't get to hear Zeus's voice right now. So
that's awesome.
So yeah, I decided to just bite the bullet and do it as a duet, and I'm so glad I did because they did not record at the same time. They did them separately, but my word, you'd have no idea. It's amazing.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is something that's like been in the back of my mind as we're talking. How do you write a god having sex? Like that seems like a really tall order. Like there's romantic hero, awesome, cool, gotta do the things right. But like a god really seems like next level pressure on that scene.
Yeah, so you're right. But they're also really fun because you get to go way out of the box. You get to go beyond just the normal positions you read about in normal romance books and add a fantasy element to it, obviously. And it's so fun because each of the gods has a different, thing about them. And I will say Eros and Zeus I felt the most pressure with because, first of all, Eros is the god of freaking love and passion.
Yeah. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, so I even, like, there's a kissing scene, and I mean, I have to take this up a notch to something I've never done because, again, he'd be the best at it. And and then with Zeus, I mean, he's freaking Zeus. So right. I knew, I will tell anybody again who that is the spiciest book in the series, and it had to be. He's Zeus, and I think it's expected, and I think it's warranted. And I personally, when I write sex scenes into my books, I personally feel like there has to be a need for them. I'm not going to just throw a sex scene in there just for the sake of a sex scene. So most of my books only have, maybe some kissing and one big scene, most of my books, but Zeus has more. It's just, it really works for the story. All of my alpha and beta readers, several of them said it's smut with a purpose. So
I love that.
And I'm okay with that because it was truly needed. And I had to just stop and say to myself, don't think about your mom reading this, just write it.
Oh my god, right. I have to totally block out my brain that no one in the world is ever gonna read this and just go for it, because I do feel that we have so many depictions of male gaze in sex. We have so many depictions of trauma, and those are so wildly accepted in our society that I love romance for being no, this is female pleasure. Let's frickin' celebrate it. And
yeah.
I really love that about romance. And so as much as sex scenes are not my favorite scene to write, I will always include them because I think that is such an important message to send, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And then also I heard, and I think Kate was the one that told me once, that every sex scene or every moment of like physical needs to do something new for the story or the character, right? It has to do something new for their connection. So if there are multiple in a book, what part of the story is this scene giving?
Yep, I agree with that. And that is something that
Yeah.
I definitely had to keep in mind when I did Zeus. But I had everybody, I said, I need you to be as harsh with me as possible because I do not want to put this out there if people are going to be, oh, she just wrote this because, spicy is in. And every single one of them had nothing bad to say. So I was like, okie doke, I'm putting it out there.
Well, and like really, if you're doing your spiciest book here, but you typically do, one scene on page, like, I mean, You Had Me at Ola has multiple scenes on page. You know what I mean? Like, there's still a lot more spice that you could be given while still meeting like reader expectations for rom-com and not stepping into erotica. Which,
Oh
I
yeah.
want to be clear, like, I'm down, like, read what you want, guys. I have absolutely no judgment for erotica, only love.
Nope.
But as a romance reader or romance writer, I'm always telling the romance more than telling the lust.
Yeah, that is the line between romance and erotica for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I mean that was the thing too. These two characters in Zeus, and this is why it makes sense for their characters. They are both very sexually passionate people, and
Mm-hmm.
the heroine on her side though hides it and is afraid to show it. And whereas obviously Zeus is like, it's out there in the open, it's not a secret. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does
and
everything in the open. Like, he is a total peacock, right? Like,
Yes, absolutely. And it's an exploration for her and coming out of her shell. And there's a bunch of other stuff happening there too. It's both a journey for both of them, finding their true selves through each other, and him actually coming to the realization that he is capable of loving somebody, and he never really thought that he was and or wanted to. So he it's definitely a redemption story for him, and then it's also a big journey for the heroine, discovering herself and things about herself that she has kept hidden. So there's a lot of spice, but it is very interwoven into the plot itself. So
that's lovely. Yeah, that is so lovely. Is there anything else that you think a new, like, someone stepping into fantasy rom-com should know going into it? Like, what little piece of wisdom would you suggest? And if you don't have an answer to that, that's okay. Because I feel like I kind of threw it at you.
no, one thing that I would definitely say is be prepared to, and it's going to sound crazy, but explain your magic system, because you kind of have to know, what are there boundaries? If there are, what are the boundaries? Where does everybody have the same type of magic? Do they have magic at all? Maybe it's not even magic. But even if you're mixing in something with the modern world, the same as if you're doing even an epic fantasy or you're just doing modern world, urban fantasy, you still have to know, even if it's not explained on the page, you have to know yourself so that it comes across in the writing. And that's something that I had to, establish, from the get-go in my Mythos series, is because, the three main gods, Hades, Zeus, and Poseidon, they all have, more magic, more power than the rest of them, because they are the three main brothers type deal. So even that type of situation, just know before you start your limitations. And if there is limitations, there should always be some form of limitation. But just know that going in before you really dive into it, because you will be called out for it and people will notice. I can assure you. So just do yourself a favor and just really know your system before you dive into that first book.
I feel like you've already answered this, but I just keep on questioning, like, how do you do this? How do you keep the balance of the romance with the magic system, especially considering you don't write gigantic books?
So when I first sat down to really think about what are these guides going to incorporate, and I will say this too, I was a huge fan of the Hercules and Xena TV shows growing up.
Okay.
And they did a really good job, actually, of, now obviously that wasn't modern times, but it was still a show where the gods walked amongst the mortals. Now they believed in them and they knew they existed, so it's a little bit different than here. But if you think about it, it's still kind of similar because they're coexisting. And they did a really good job of showing each individual god's power and kind of, showing, where the limitations were, and that each of them didn't have the same power, but they could all, teleport away type deal. And then, each god, depending on if it was Aphrodite or if it was Ares, had their different types of powers. So I definitely got inspired from that for mine too. They each may have one type of thing that they can do, but each have these specific roles and these specific things that define them. And so when I decide to do romance interwoven in there, it was also a matter of, what can they give away, but also show that they're godly. So there's throwing in little hints like that too. And honestly, I couldn't explain how I do it because I think this urban fantasy is what I would call this mostly, because it's rom-com too, but if you're going to really get down to the actual, at a library type, categorization, I would call it urban fantasy. And I've read a lot of it, and Iona Andrews is one of my favorites as far as urban fantasy goes.
She's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually a husband and wife team. And
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yes, it's a synonym. Her name is Iona and his name's Gordon, and they're both Andrews. And I, oh my gosh, I love their stuff, and I am highly inspired by them too. They have a really great way of interweaving. They do all kinds of stuff in their books, and the heroes are also really awesome. And I feel like it's because they do have that male, input from having a man writing too. So it's just a bunch of stuff that has to combine together. And I just feel that my brain was hardwired for it, to be honest with you. I've just always really liked fantasy, and just it's easier to, it really truly is. It's easier to write something set in the modern world with magic. But not to say that I've also been working on for 4 years now, a big, huge epic space fantasy. That's this huge world building project.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So that's different, and it takes a lot more because you're building everything from the ground up. So that I'll say is definitely a challenge. But for me, the mixing the magic with the modern world, it's just something I think I've always been prepared to do since I was a kid, to be honest with you.
Okay, so you just kind of feel like it was an ingrained skill set between your two loves sort of thing.
Yeah, because I look back on a lot of the stuff that I watched as a kid, like even Labyrinth, for instance, is one of my favorite movies of all time. And what is that? It's set in the modern setting, and this modern mortal is put, through this labyrinth and with the Goblin King, and it's one of my favorites. And I grew up watching a lot of stuff like that. And even if you look at Disney movies, a lot of that too. I mean, Beauty and the Beast, okay, well, modern setting, and then it's, there's magic involved because there's this sorceress puts this curse on the beast, and etc. So it's just I grew up with that a lot, and so I think it just kind of settled in. The same thing with enemies to lovers trope. I grew up with that all over the place.
Yeah. Oh, I love an enemies to lovers.
Yeah, I think Batman and Catwoman was my first actual introduction to that trope. And I didn't realize it, back when I was a kid. But then it just, I noticed as more and more stuff that I liked, that was the trend that I really, really liked, when they really just didn't like each other in the beginning. And then had this, but they always liked each other from the beginning, but they just thought they did it. Exactly. And they didn't want to admit it.
Yeah. You little adorable idiots. You're so cute. You're
yeah.
So
Exactly. So I think all of these things as I grew up, I would watch them so much, everything, and it just it settled into my head. So
it's funny you brought up like Batman and Catwoman, and I just had like a moment of like, oh, and realizing what imprinted for me, because okay, everyone's gonna hate me, but I was young, okay. I loved Batman Forever. I loved it. I watched it so many times, just over and over and over, and I loved Val Kilmer. And the mistaken identity of her being in love with Batman and her being in love with Bruce Wayne and not knowing that they're the same person. I have just had like such a aha moment of like, Of course I love that trope. Like, of course I love that. The world makes sense now. So you've taught me something new today.
Yeah, it really, it circles back to what you grew up in your childhood. It really does.
Yeah, it
It's
really does.
everything I write right now, 100%. I grew up watching and reading and everything when I was a kid growing up, 100%.
Well, even like Labyrinth with the Goblin King, like toying with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's another id for me.
Yep.
Dude.
Yep.
We
Masquerade
are
Ball.
just oh yes. Yes. A masquerade ball. Oh my gosh. Now I just want to talk about all the things that we love from our childhood.
Well, and I think we grew up in the same era because we're around the same age from what you said earlier.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I considering what you were saying you grew up with, I'm like, okay, yeah, we're right there.
Yeah.
So,
Yep, we are. We're right there.
we're right there. Carly, to tie everything up, we like to give a little piece of writing advice. It doesn't have to be anything like earth shattering, and I can definitely go first if you want me to kind of give you a little bit of example, unless there's like something you just like to, like a piece of advice that has really helped you or that you like to give.
I will say this. When I first started out, I didn't know of this, this existed, and I didn't use it at first. And when I started to, it was a life changer for me. Sincerely, get yourself a critique partner or two, and hopefully stick with them throughout as much as they're willing to, and throughout your writing careers. It has helped me immensely. And I will give a shout out to Anna Karina. She has been my critique partner for 5 years now, and it's been amazing because we both are harsh critics to each other, but we're also each other's biggest cheerleaders, and it has helped me big time because sometimes you need to have this other person who's willing to step outside of it and give you, okay, here's the real deal. And she's put out a lot of stuff that I would not have thought about or I was too close to, and she needed to, rein me in. And it's essential, honestly, if you can find somebody that you're able to partner like that with. It will improve your writing. It will help in the end with everything, even helping to find little things with grammatical stuff, but also really just helping you step outside of your own writing, because as awesome as you think you are, sometimes you need somebody also to, take you down a peg and just really talk things through, and make sure it's somebody that is not going to be just mean, but really be a true friend and just somebody who's willing to talk things through with you. Because sometimes it's even just a matter of them being a sounding board. Just listening to you. We toss ideas around aside from just, reading each other's stuff. We toss ideas. I help her figure out, character names, which I'm really good at, things like that. So find yourself a critique partner. It will help you immensely.
I absolutely agree with that. I found my critique group, which is how I met Kate, my co-host. We started in 2020, back in like May of 2020. We were all like in the same reader group, and then we were like, we're just really having a hard time because the world is very strange. And so we started our Discord, and I cannot tell you how much my writing has improved from the group and getting their input. I know so much more about story. I know so much more about grammar for sure, but like really, like, you can hire someone to fix the grammar. Like, the most important thing to me is like, what is my story? How do I get more tension? Where are the stakes? It's knowing that they are able to tell you more so what a reader is going to see and give you input on how to better that experience for the reader. And my writing across the board is wildly improved because of them. And it's only been, now 2 years. God, I completely agree with that piece of advice. And now that you had that like knockout piece of advice,
Here to steal your thunder.
Oh, lately on TikTok and stuff, I'm seeing a lot of people, like, there's a lot of readers saying, don't do this, don't use this word, all this stuff. And writers, essentially kind of querying readers before they start writing. Like, do you like this? Do you not like this? And from the position of writing that I'm in right now, I just don't think that's... You're always going to have somebody that loves you. They're always going to have somebody that doesn't love you. Write a book that you love that is going to be fun to read, and let that be your ambition. And that would be my piece of advice from my ignorant point of view. So, I'm sure there's plenty of people that would be able to give me examples of it being the exact opposite. That's my passion on it. So, Carly, where can everybody find you?
I am on every piece of social media. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, everywhere. So if you just look up Carly Spade, you'll find me on any of those. I will say that I probably most frequent Instagram and Twitter. Twitter, I do talk books and everything, but if you want to see my nerdy side, that's where you go. I definitely do it more there. Yes, and any social media. I also have a newsletter. If you go to carlyspade.com, you can sign up for my newsletter. It has special perks with exclusive cover reveals and blurbs and excerpts and all that good stuff. Yeah.
Yay. You can find me, Marty V, at martyv.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter as well. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at... Oh, shoot. I always forget where the author comes in. I think it's at Marty the author. I don't know, listener. It's going to be in the show notes. Just click the link, okay? And then, yeah, you can find Kate at by Kate Pryor on Instagram and Twitter. This has been Romance Writers Therapy, and Carly Spade has been freaking brilliant. Thank you so much, Carly.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fun. Thank you.
And Carly, congratulations on Zeus having his birthday today in Contemporary Mythos, and his book is available. Where's he available?
Amazon for ebook. Paperback is also on Book Depository. I know Barnes and Noble and pretty much any online retailer. And it's also available on audiobook today as the duet that I mentioned earlier, and that's through Audible. So they're all available, all formats.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Look at you getting it done. Way to go.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, listener, we love you so much, and we will talk to you later. Bye.